So of course, this is gonna start around 4:20 in the afternoon. Hint, hint. But yep, I'm watching this off of the Marijuana Moment website, and interesting. We're about to hear the hearing before the House on the MORE Act, which is the Republican bill that's been being presented.
The Rules Committee will come to order. I'd like to welcome our witnesses to provide testimony in H.R. 3617, the MORE Act. Chairman Nadler, Ranking Member Biggs, we are delighted that you are here. And before I recognize Chairman Nadler, I would just remind everybody, I know there's a briefing at 5 on Ukraine. What is it? Is it 5? 4:45. 4:45. I'm sorry. Okay. It's 15 minutes earlier than I was told. So 4:45. So we might want to, if you want to go, we're going to be concise, I think. That's it. But you don't have to be. So Chairman Adler, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman McGovern, Ranking Member Cole, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to testify about H.R. 3617, the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act, or the MORE Act. I was proud to introduce this long overdue legislation, which would reverse decades of failed federal policies based on the criminalization of marijuana. It would also take steps to address the heavy toll these policies have taken across the country, particularly among communities of color. Last Congress, the House voted on a bipartisan basis to address this issue. Unfortunately, the Senate failed to act, so I'm pleased that we're moving forward again. Our action on this issue would follow the growing recognition of the states that the status quo is unacceptable. Despite the federal government's continuing criminalization of marijuana, 36 states and the District of Columbia have legalized medical cannabis. 19 states and the District of Columbia have legalized cannabis for adult recreational use. If states are the laboratories of democracy, it is long past time for the federal government to recognize that this experiment in legalization has been a resounding success. The MORE Act would make 3 important changes to federal law. It would, 1, remove marijuana or cannabis from the list of federally controlled substances. 2, authorize the provision of resources funded by a federal tax on marijuana sales to address the needs of communities that have been seriously impacted by the including increasing the participation of communities of color in the burgeoning cannabis market. And 3, provide the expungement of federal marijuana convictions and arrests. For far too long, we have treated marijuana as a criminal justice problem instead of as a matter of personal choice and public health. Whatever one's views are on the use of marijuana for recreational or medicinal use, the policy of arrest, prosecution, and incarceration at the federal level has proven both unwise and unjust. The MORE Act would address some of these negative impacts. For example, it would establish an opportunity trust fund within the Treasury Department to fund federal programs to support communities adversely affected by the war on drugs. These programs would provide services to individuals, including job training, reentry services, and substance use disorder services, and would provide funds for loans to assist small businesses that are owned and controlled by social and economically disadvantaged individuals. This legislation would also provide resources for programs that minimize barriers to marijuana licensing and employment for individuals adversely affected by the war on drugs. The collateral consequences of a conviction for marijuana possession, or even just an arrest, can be devastating. For individuals with a criminal record, it can be difficult or impossible to vote, to obtain educational loans, to get a job, to maintain a professional license, to secure housing, to receive government assistance, or even to adopt a child. These exclusions create an often permanent second-class status for millions of Americans. Another important provision of the MORE Act recognizes this injustice and addresses these harmful effects by expunging and sealing federal convictions and arrests for marijuana offenses. With all this in mind, it is not surprising that over the past 2 decades, public support for legalizing marijuana has surged, as state after state has voted to make marijuana legal in some form. States have led the way and continue to lead the way on marijuana reform, but our federal laws have not kept pace with the obvious need for change. It is time for the federal government to catch up and do what is right. Criminal penalties for marijuana offenses and the resulting collateral consequences are unjust and harmful to our society. The MORE Act comprehensively addresses these injustices, and I urge all my colleagues to support this legislation. I also ask the committee to make an order my manager's amendment, which would clarify that the provisions of Section 9 mirror the scope of relief under the criminal justice provisions. Thank you for your consideration, and I look forward to your question.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Biggs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ranking Member Cole, members of the committee, I'm grateful to be able to be with you today. I will truncate some of my opening statement, and you'll probably still feel it was way too long by the time I'm done anyway, but I'm going to give you the what I consider to be the highlights. So I want to just reiterate, we're ignoring border crisis, inflation, crime rates, etc., to talk about legalization of marijuana at the federal level. So this isn't just about legalization, though. This is a marijuana stimulus bill. HR 3617 doesn't just federally deschedule marijuana. It incentivizes marijuana use and distribution, and it's reckless in its approach, provides no limits on or requirements to clearly identify the potency of the marijuana or its extracts or concentrates. In 95, the THC concentration in commonly cultivated marijuana plants was approximately 4%. Today, currently marketed concentrations range from an average of 20% to as high as 99% THC. And there are a series of studies that I will submit to the record when I'm finished, Mr. Chairman, dealing with the THC and its health consequences. This bill also fails to impose a minimum age limit of 25, a restriction recommended by the Surgeon General due to the unique harm that marijuana poses to developing brains. According to the Surgeon General's advisory, the human brain continues to develop from before birth into the mid-20s and is vulnerable to the effects of addictive substances. And the Surgeon General has warned that frequent marijuana use during adolescence is associated with changes in the areas of the brain involved in attention, memory, decision-making, and motivation. Adolescent marijuana use is associated with declines in IQ, school performance, and attendance and life satisfaction, as well as increased rates of suicide attempts. Even for those who think that it is a good idea to legalize marijuana, the approach reflected in this bill is short-sighted. Supporters of this bill have not adequately considered the effect of this legislation on the American public and especially on our children. Section 3 of the bill removes marijuana from the schedule of the Controlled Substances Act. In other words, it would no longer be a federal crime to possess or sell marijuana. And Section 5, however, imposes criminal penalties of up to 5 years in prison for not filing proper permits or keeping adequate records. This bill removes certain marijuana crimes, but then creates entirely new marijuana crimes. If you think our drug laws are complicated, and I invite you to take a look at our tax code where these criminal penalties will be found if this bill becomes law. One of the findings in this bill claims that, quote, the continued enforcement of cannabis prohibition laws results in over 600,000 arrests annually, close quote. According to the FBI's Uniform Crime Report, there were actually an estimated 350,150 arrests for marijuana-related violations in 2020. The last year we have data. Now, why is that important? It's because these numbers are for state and local offenses. But this bill deals with the federal law. Those numbers are inaccurate as far as federal law goes. In fact, according to the U.S. Sentencing Commission, there were a total of 16,829 drug cases, convictions reported. Of those, the U.S. Sentencing Commission reported a few more than 1,170 marijuana convictions in 2020. That's a far cry from the 600,000 touted in this bill. Finally, decriminalizing, regulating, and taxing marijuana creates more problems than it purports to solve. Let me refer you to an LA Times expose. And this is what they say. Although advocates of marijuana legalization argued that it would reduce crime, black market grows throughout the state have seen episodes of violence, and Southern California is no exception. Last year, 7 people, mostly recent immigrants from Laos, were gunned down and killed at a marijuana grow in Riverside County. The piece further says Proposition 64, which is what legalized marijuana
in non-legal states
in California, promised to end the black market cultivation and sale of marijuana in California communities. It also promised to create jobs, generate hundreds of millions of dollars in tax revenue to cover costs of administration, substance abuse treatment, and law enforcement. But things haven't worked out that way. Today, the legal pot industry is struggling. As much as 80% of the marijuana sold in California comes from black market grows. In California, when they approved Prop 64, which reduced the penalty for growing and selling marijuana from a felony to a misdemeanor, they have seen a massive increase in illegal grow farms. And concomitantly, there's a correlation with rising crime rates in LA County, San Bernardino County, and in southern Oregon counties as well, since they did the same. Those illegal grow farms use forced labor. They engage in violent crime. And I will be submitting reports on all of those, Mr. Chairman, without going through an extensive listing of those. These illegal grow operations are largely carried out by transnational criminal organizations. These cartels have been identified as originating
no motivation.
in Mexico,
If it was
Ukraine,
federally
Russia,
legal,
Bulgaria,
there would be no
and
motivation
China.
to have the illegal
The Daily
grows.
Caller
If we're
recently
allowed
released
to
a
grow
documentary called
in our house, there'd be no
Cartelville
motivation. There'd be no
USA
market.
that exposes the connection between illegal immigration and cartel-run illegal marijuana grows. In California, cartel-run illegal grows are stealing millions of gallons of water. And those of you who are from the West, you understand what it means to see millions of gallons of water stolen from legitimate farmers. And
Yes, and federal
and that's what's
legalization would
happening
stop
out there.
that because it would
According to LA
decrease
County
the
Sheriff
demand.
Alex
It'd be too
Villanueva,
expensive.
cartels are stealing water in the middle of the night from farmers. Stolen water is loaded onto tanker trucks and then delivered to grow sites. Our own colleague, Congressman Mike Garcia from California, has been outspoken about the illegal grow operations in California. And on June 8, 2021, 400 law enforcement personnel from the LA County Sheriff's Office, DEA, and several other local, state, and federal agencies joined forces to carry out an illegal marijuana grow bust that turned out to be the largest drug bust in LA County Sheriff's Department history. The 10-day operation resulted in 16.5 tons of processed marijuana seized with a street value of over $1 billion. And that is after
That's way overvalued.
California legalized.
But if you federally
marijuana
legalized, it would be even
several
more
years after.
overvalued.
It's estimated in LA, San Bernardino, and
Make
Riverside
marijuana way
counties
cheaper.
alone, there are more than 1,500 illegal grow sites. There's an average of 1,800 plants in each grow, equating to 2.7 million plants or 5.4 million pounds of marijuana. One member of the Judiciary Committee from Oregon, Congressman Bentz, has repeatedly discussed the impacts of illegal pot farms in Oregon. He has even written to DOJ about the issue, asking for DOJ's help. But if this bill becomes law, the problems in Oregon
But I
will get
bet
worse, not
those
better.
people growing
This
in
bill's the wrong
Oregon
approach at the
are
wrong
not
time. We should be
selling in
addressing
Oregon.
Other crises created by this administration, not passing a marijuana stimulus bill. And I urge this committee to grant an open rule on this seriously flawed legislation. Mr. Chairman, I will submit to for the record a recent study from the Massachusetts General Hospital about marijuana use and its failure to alleviate pain. I'll submit another report on states and their legalization of marijuana. Can't read my own writing. And then I will submit, won't go through the whole list of documents, but I have probably 30 or 40 documents here dealing with everything from impacts of marijuana, but also impacts of legalization of marijuana from the various states that have done so. And I'll do that to truncate that for you, Mr. Chairman.
You want to submit for the record?
Yes, I'll submit
with unanimous consent, they will be submitted to the record.
Thank you. Now yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your testimony, Chairman Nadler. Thank you for your testimony. Obviously, we have a difference of opinion here, but both have been very clear. I'm happy to yield to Dr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will just tell both of you, one of my biggest concerns has been a law enforcement concern, and I don't think at the local level we actually have prepared our district attorneys and local courts for the problem of impaired driving when it involves both marijuana and alcohol. We have good quantitative tests for alcohol. We all know the legal limit is 0.08. We have no such similar guidance for marijuana and its active components. The qualitative tests, my understanding is, remain positive for some time when impairment may not be present. But the fact of the matter is, the two together are additive to the problem of impaired driving, and it is a big deal whether we want to ignore it or not. And I just don't think we should be doing this until we're adequately preparing our local DAs and law enforcement for what they are facing.
I don't know. In my opinion, marijuana makes
I don't know if you have any comment on that.
drive slower.
I'll just make one quick comment. I know that you're in a hurry, but you know with DUIs you have the horizontal gaze nystagmus test, and that will measure not just alcohol, but it'll also measure most other chemical substances, it has a real tough time diagnosing or finding marijuana, because you might have some nystagmus, but you won't necessarily have actual impairment to drive. So it becomes a very confusing test, and you're right with regard to marijuana specifically.
Thank you, Mr. Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too want to, add my community's input into this bill and why this bill is so important for communities like the one that I represent. Not just our communities, but both red and blue states have moved ahead of the federal government and decriminalized marijuana, either for medical or recreational use. My own state of California, along with 17 other states, has legalized the use of marijuana for recreational use, while a further 19 states allow for medicinal use of marijuana. In total, well over half of all states no longer criminalize all uses of marijuana, making federal standards the outlier. Harmonizing federal and state laws will help improve public safety. It will help improve public safety because our local police departments, working with federal jurisdictions, can finally focus on illegal dispensaries, illegal growths, and the unbanked, currently legal dispensaries are often the targets of organized crime. My own home city of Pomona, on January 24th, 10 pounds of marijuana, 34 pounds of marijuana products, and a firearm were seized on that Monday, in addition to a handgun, a firearm. That was an illegal dispensary. My police force doesn't have enough police officers to be able to enforce federal laws that are so outdated and are being used to further victimize people that have been deemed as legal businesses in the state of California. So for those reasons, I think that it is important to ensure that we give law enforcement the tools that they need to not go after what is already deemed as legal
I have no idea what you were
businesses and focus on the problems. When a business is being targeted by a gang cartel, asking them to pay an illegal tax to allow them to conduct business, that's a bad thing. And that is something that I want my local police officers to work on, not chasing their tail after trying to enforce a federal law that has already been deemed as irrational in the state of California. So I support this bill, and I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to turn a leaf on marijuana.
These are the kind of arguments we're getting.
Allow for local law enforcement to focus on those illegally doing businesses in our community.
Thank you. Mr. Reschenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the sake of time, I'm just going to yield back.
You're such a good guy. You were good too today, yeah. Appreciate it. Mr. Perlmutter.
I'm going to be carrying the rule tomorrow, I think, so I'm going to pass.
Fishbach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am not going to pass. Ranking Member Biggs, I think you mentioned it a little bit in your statement. You touched on it about some of the issues with under 25 or kids, and I do have serious concerns about how we are going to protect minors in this, under this legislation, and if there are provisions for that. I know that not that long ago, a lot of the flavored vaping things were banned. Is there similar kinds of provisions that may be in this bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Fishbach. There are no provisions in here that control for age in distribution or substance use here, and that's a problem. Because as we've seen even in Arizona and when Colorado first came out you actually saw everything from gummies to, mock snacks and treats that were infused with various THC levels derivative from marijuana products. And so that became a real problem, and this bill does not even address that at all.
So it does not address any of those kinds of child attractive kinds of things, the gummy
Probably
bears in
they
particular.
No.
So thank
Should
you.
address.
Does it have any kind of
Packaging,
common sense
maybe.
limitations on advertising or through social media, TV, whatever? Are there any limits to that?
No.
Does it provide any kind of funding for public awareness campaigns that would discourage minors from using it?
No, it does not.
And does the bill provide any guidance or resources to law enforcement regarding enforcing existing laws related to marijuana? I think of the DUIs and things like that.
No, it does not, nor does it give any special funding for training. It gives special funding if you choose to open up and go legal and create a dispensary, but not to train officers and not to enforce.
And I think I know the answer, but is law enforcement supporting this bill?
I've heard no law enforcement agents saying we need this, we want this. In fact, I think from the LA Times expose, you just talk to those 3 county sheriffs in LA, and they're in LA, San Bernardino, Riverside, they're going to be telling you, please, that you guys are crazy to do this.
Thank you, Ranking Member. And just one other, I think you
It's
mentioned
too
it
much
in
of a
your opening
micro
about,
perspective.
I am
Yeah,
too
think, where are they
puzzled
shipping the
about the timing
marijuana
of
to?
this as
If
we
it
are,
was legal
receiving
everywhere,
calls from our
why would they
constituents
need to
about
ship
high
it
gas
there?
prices, inflation, all kinds of things like
Be less
that.
demand.
And we're sitting
Think
here
about it logically.
talking about legalizing marijuana. That's what the priority is today, instead of helping out the American people. And so I just wanted to add my voice to your concern on that. And with that, do you have anything else you'd like to add, Ranking Member?
No, Ms. Fishbach. I would just say that the other issues apparently are up in smoke while we consider this.
Mr. Chair, I'm yielding back.
Whoa.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
I just want to assure the gentlewoman that we are working on trying to deal with issues like gas prices. You'll be happy to know there'll probably be legislation coming your way on that. And today, and a little earlier today, we talked about the importance of putting a cap on the cost of insulin, which unfortunately continues to rise for so many people. I hope that some Republicans will support that because there are millions of people in this country who are impacted by diabetes.
Use the moment.
And the idea that a drug that's been on the market for 100 years continues to rise in cost is unconscionable. I wish there was a little more outrage over that. In any event, Mr. Raskin.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'll just add to your point that the American people want a reform of our marijuana laws, which you can tell from what's happening in dozens of states around the union. And so we can do that at the same time that we are doing things like lowering prescription drug prices. I yield back.
And Mr. Perlmutter reminds us of that. 3 times a week, right? Ms. Scanlon.
Thank you. I would just add that for states or commonwealths like Pennsylvania, where medicinal marijuana is legal, the fact that this is still on the schedules for the federal government creates a huge economic problem. So I yield back.
Mr. Morelli.
I did not hear that.
Mr. DeSagne. Ms. Ross.
Mr. Chairman, I have no comments. I yield back.
Mr. Nagus, all set? Anybody else have anything to say?
Yeah,
Hearing none. Chairman Nadler, Ranking Member Biggs, thank you so much. Appreciate it. You free to go?
This is definitely not giving me a lot of confidence that we're going to have any kind of marijuana reform soon.
Anybody else want to testify?
We got to see this Republican bill
Ms. Roddy,
hearing. I don't know.
Dr. Burgess.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. I actually have 2
You got your
amendments.
mic on?
Yeah.
Is your mic on?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I have 2 amendments. The first one that would simply allow for marijuana use disorder and methamphetamine use disorder to be, as determined by the Secretary of Health and Human Services, to be taken into consideration when evaluating care for Medicaid benefits. This was actually directed under the Support Act, which was signed into law in 2018. And I think it would be important to have it as part of this. we've got to be able to track the data that is out there, and without data, we're simply going to be lost. This amendment is intended to be specific and intentional with collecting data on drug dependency disorders, and I respectfully ask consideration of the amendment. The other amendment I just want to bring up is not mine, it's Andy Harris's. I will ask unanimous consent to put his statement in the record.
Without objection.
But very briefly, it prohibits carrying out any portion of the bill until the Comptroller of the United States, Secretary of HHS, Secretary of Transportation have studied the societal, public health, and public safety implications of enactment of the bill, and the Director for the National Institute on Drug Abuse has certified that the societal, public health, and public safety benefits of enactment of this bill outweigh the societal, public health, and public safety risk. So it is simply a risk-benefit analysis. I'd ask for consideration of Dr. Harris's amendment.
Any questions of Dr. Burgess? Hearing none, thank you very much. Anybody else want to testify? There were no other members who want to testify, so this closes the hearing on H.R. 3617. At this time, the chair will entertain a motion from the distinguished gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 3617, the MORE Act, a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate on the bill equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary or their designees. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 117-37, modified by the amendment printed in Part A of the Rules Committee report, shall be considered as adopted, and the bill, as amended, shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule makes in order only those further amendments to H.R. 3617 printed in Part B of the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against amendments printed in Part B of the report. The rule provides one motion to recommit. The rule provides for consideration of H.R. 6833, the Affordable Insulin Now Act, under a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided among and controlled by the chairs and ranking minority members of the committees on Education, Labor, Energy and Commerce, and Ways and Means, or their respective designees. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 117-38, modified by the amendment printed in Part C of the Rules Committee report, shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule provides one motion to recommit, and finally the rule provides that House Resolution 188, agreed to March 8, 2021, is amended by striking April 1st, 2022, each place it appears, and inserting April 29th, 2022.
You heard the motion from the gentleman from Colorado. Is there any discussion or amendment? Dr. Burgess.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order amendment number 1, H.R. 3617, offered by Mr. Bishop of North Carolina. The amendment requires the Secretary of Transportation, the Attorney General, to develop the best practices for recognition and testing of drivers impaired by marijuana. Unfortunately, there have been instances of impaired driving. I've seen them in my district that have resulted in fatal accidents. In some of these cases, the drivers were known to be impaired by both alcohol and marijuana, but there is only a roadside test for alcohol and marijuana. Therefore, these were cited as drunk driving accidents only. Efforts to legalize marijuana at the federal level should be complemented by an ability to detect its abuse on the road. I remain concerned that we do not yet have a thorough understanding of the effects of marijuana on development, judgment, and motor skills. Again, we need more data on how the combination of marijuana and alcohol affects judgment and motor skills at the very least, we should be able to detect the use of both substances and inform data collection efforts. So I urge adoption of my amendment.
You heard the gentleman's amendment. Any discussion? Hearing none, the vote is on the Burgess amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. No. The roll call vote. Oh, I'm sorry. There's a roll call. A roll call vote has been requested. Clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Torres. Mrs. Torres, no. Mr. Perlmutter. Mr. Perlmutter, no. Mr. Raskin. Mr. Raskin, no. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Morelli. Mr. Morelli, no. Mr. DeSaulnier. No. Mr. DeSaulnier, no. Ms. Ross. No. Ms. Ross, no. Mr. Neguse. Mr. Neguse, no. Mr. Cole. Aye. Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Burgess.
Aye.
Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Rushenthaler.
Aye.
Mr. Rushenthaler, aye. Mrs. Fishbach.
Aye.
Mrs. Fishbach, aye. Mr. Chairman.
A no.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
Members not agreed to. Further members, Mr. Cole.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I've got an amendment to the rule. I move that the committee strike the language of the rule that would continue the tolling of days for the resolution of inquiry. I know you're shocked that I'm offering this amendment. Years ago, actually, Mr. Chairman, and I mean this very respectfully, you and I were managing a rule together, actually, on the floor, and you complained during the debate, and I quote, to shut people down, just to shut everybody out, that not only diminishes the institution, it diminishes democracy. I think you were right. Sadly, Mr. Chairman, this is exactly what's happening with resolutions of inquiry. It's been 680 days since Democrats precluded the use of this important oversight tool, a tool that's existed almost from the founding of the Republic. And the excuses from your side of the aisle, Mr. Chairman, have continued to evolve from committee, can't handle the right now, it would be disruptive on the floor, to the latest where you said that some Republicans just wanted to throw tantrums and cause delays. Chairman, I can certainly sympathize with your concerns, but I think those are red herrings. If the committee chairs are concerned about so-called delay tactics, they could and have used the rules of the House to cut off debate, in my view, prematurely for legislation. Nothing would preclude them from using these tools they have already used to expedite the process of considering resolutions of inquiry. I think it's clear that the provision continues to be included in the rules, not for a legitimate reason, but rather because it's like dominoes. Once Speaker Pelosi admits that we're emerging from the other side of the pandemic and removes some of these provisions, there'll be much more pressure to eliminate proxy voting, something that she cannot and will not do because of the narrow nature of her majority. These provisions serve no purpose except to shut out the minority, but all rank and file members of your party, as well as our own, are having their requests for information heard. It's well beyond time for them to be repealed. So I urge adoption of the amendment.
Thank you very much. And I'm not going to say much other than the fact that I hear the gentleman, and we're having discussions about some of the things that he's talked about, and hopefully in the very near future we can move on some of that stuff. But anyway, at this point I would urge a no vote. Any other discussion? Okay. If not, the vote is on the Cole amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. 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 Being the chair, the noes have it.
That's recorded vote.
Recorded vote has been requested. Clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Torres.
Sorry. Question on the bill?
Oh, the amendment. The Cole amendment.
Mr. Cole's amendment.
Mr. Cole, I'm sorry, no.
I'm so hurt. You were about to go yes until my name was attached to the amendment.
Mrs. Torres, no. Mr. Perlmutter. Mr. Perlmutter, no. Mr. Raskin. Mr.
Somebody
Raskin,
has some
no. Ms.
attention
Scanlon.
issues, or maybe
Ms.
she's just
Scanlon,
busy.
no.
I
Mr.
don't
Morelli.
know.
Mr. Morelli, no. Mr. DeSaulnier.
No.
Mr. DeSaulnier, no. Ms. Ross.
No.
Ms. Ross, no. Mr. Neguse. Mr. Neguse, no. Mr.
Working
Cole.
hard over
Aye.
there.
Mr.
Yes.
Cole, aye. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Rushenthaler. Mr. Rushenthaler, aye. Mrs. Fishbach. Mrs. Fishbach, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
Members not agreed to.
Chairman, can I just say something very quickly?
Yeah.
I just want to say, and I appreciate this, I noted much less enthusiasm in the no votes than I've heard in the past. So I take this as a sign of hope, good faith. So I just want you to know that I leave here defeated but optimistic about the future.
You're
never defeated.
As long as it's not the beginnings of COVID. Right, Ms. Fishbach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize for going out of turn last. All of a sudden I heard something and I thought, oh no, we're finishing up. So didn't want to finish before I got the chance. But Mr. Chair, I have an amendment to the rule. I move that the committee make an order amendment number 6 to HR 3617 offered by Mr. Stauber of Minnesota. This amendment ensures that illegal immigrants who are convicted of driving under the influence of marijuana are not shielded from deportation. As we heard Mr. Stauber testify, there are many families in this country that have lost their sons and daughters to people who were unlawfully in this country and drove under the influence. Assuring that this legislation is not weaponized and used as a tool to circumvent the law and existing deportation mechanisms is the responsible course of action. I urge adoption of my motion and I yield back.
I don't think there's that many immigrants getting high and running people over. I mean, they're probably getting drunk and running people over, but that's a problem everywhere.
Opposed, no. No. And if either chair, the noes have it. You want a roll call vote has been requested. Clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Torres.
No.
Mrs. Torres, no. Mr. Perlmutter. Mr. Perlmutter, no.
Wake
Mr.
on that
Raskin.
one.
Mr. Raskin, no. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Morelli. Mr. Morelli, no. Mr. DeSaulnier. No. Mr. DeSaulnier, no. Ms. Ross.
No.
Ms. Ross, no. Mr. Neguse. Mr. Neguse, no. Mr. Cole. Aye. Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Burgess. Aye. Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Rushenthaler. Mr. Rushenthaler, aye. Mrs. Fishbach. Mrs. Fishbach, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
Amendment is not agreed to. Further amendments.
Mr. Chair, I have an amendment.
Got a strict split of 4-9.
Mr. Chair, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order amendment number 4 to HR 3617 offered by my Democratic colleague, Mr. Lamb of Pennsylvania. This amendment maintains existing penalties for selling or providing minors with marijuana and for distributing marijuana near schools. Mr. Chair, although our perspective on the MORE Act may differ, I hope we can agree to protect our schools and the children who attend them through this common sense amendment. It is unfortunate this language was not included in the manager's amendment, but let us rectify this oversight with bipartisan agreement that marijuana does not belong in the hands of children and make this amendment in order. I urge the adoption of my motion and I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Heard
you could sell
heard the
that one.
gentlewoman's amendment. Any discussion? If not, the vote is on the Fishbach amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. No. Either chair, the noes have it. A roll call vote has been requested. Clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Torres.
No.
Mrs. Torres, no. Mr. Perlmutter.
No.
Mr. Perlmutter, no. Mr. Raskin.
No.
Mr. Raskin, no. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Morelli. Mr. Morelli, no. Mr. DeSaulnier.
No.
Mr. DeSaulnier, no. Ms. Ross.
No.
Ms. Ross, no. Mr. Neguse. Mr. Neguse, no. Mr. Cole.
Aye.
Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Rushenthaler. Mr. Rushenthaler, aye. Mrs. Fishbach. Mrs. Fishbach, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
Amendments not agreed to. Are there further amendments? If not, the vote is now on the motion from the gentleman from Colorado. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Question.
Recorded vote has been requested. Clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Torres.
Aye.
Mrs. Torres, aye. Mr. Perlmutter.
Aye.
Mr. Perlmutter, aye. Mr. Raskin.
Aye.
Mr. Raskin, aye. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Morelli. Mr. Morelli, aye. Mr. DeSaulnier.
Aye.
Mr. DeSaulnier, aye. Ms. Ross.
Aye.
Ms. Ross, aye. Mr. Neguse. Mr. Neguse, aye. Mr. Cole.
No.
Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Rushenthaler. Mr. Rushenthaler, no. Mrs. Fishbach. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk report the total.
9 yeas, 4 nays.
And the motion is agreed to. Mr. Perlmutter will carry it for the Democrats.
And for the Republicans, Ms. Fishman.
And Ms. Fishbach will carry it for the Republicans. So I think that's it. So thank you, everybody. Without objection, the committee is adjourned. Talk to you.
All right, people. So that happened. I don't know how I feel about it. I feel like we could have had better advocacy on the behalf of marijuana legalization. I think there's some of those issues that could have definitely been addressed Um, I mean, some of the challenges. Like, I mean, I get you need to be able to understand the impact on driving, but I'm pretty sure there's some peer-reviewed studies that show that marijuana is nowhere near the impact of alcohol. Um, but I would be pro putting that forward. Thing about selling near schools and things like that. I mean, I think that's relative because I don't know. There's some urban areas where that might not. There might be a bar across the street from or near a school or within a certain range. So I mean, I think it should be treated the same, kind of like alcohol. Um, but there could be a corner store or a grocery store, right next to a school, and that may have alcohol in it. So I don't know. I think the age requirement as far as lifting it to 25, I don't know. I think the states should be able to determine their own limitations, and it should vary state by state. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it should be 21 or whatever it is, or 25. I definitely heard that your mind is still developing till 25. So I don't know if I'm completely against that. But yeah, I mean, this whole argument about illegal grows in legal states, I think the federal law is what's causing that problem. Like I'm saying before, it makes logical sense that you're not going to have those types of illegal grows if there's nowhere to ship it to. The black market thrives because something's illegal. So if you legalized it, the black market, it'll become a gray market, sure, but I think there'd be way less violence. It's just softer on the edges, or maybe I'm completely wrong, and that'll create a vacuum, and people are not going to know how to make money, and that creates violence, possibly, or they were talking about organized crime and those kinds of things, and so maybe that they'll start hustling the legal businesses, but I don't know. If you're able to grow in your home, your own, so you don't need to go out to the store to buy as often. I think that's going to have a major effect on the price, and it's, black market's not going to be able to thrive in that kind of environment, because the reason why they thrive is because they could charge so much on the street where it's illegal. So yes, they take the risk of growing it in a legal state, which is less because there's probably less investigation in a legal state. But then they ship it to those states that it's illegal because the price is higher over there. So if there was no federal mandate, I think a lot of states would fall in line, or at least maybe even local jurisdictions or whatever it is. But, I don't know. I don't see why this should be. You're talking about the difference between 600,000 and or 1,100 or whatever. It doesn't matter if anybody is going to jail because they possessed a couple of ounces of marijuana. I think that's just wrong. If they're selling to kids or they're doing some other things, carrying weapons or executing violence, carrying weapons without permits or whatever the local laws are. I think those are different issues, but it's just, why are you sending them to jail for marijuana though? I mean, then send them to jail for that stuff. Investigate those things. It's just, I don't know, a lot of marijuana lounges and whatnot. Yeah, they have to keep a gun for security because it's illegal. So they have to deal a lot of these legit businesses that are legit in the state as far as it's concerned. They can't do banking, so there's way more risk. Of course, they're gonna be having guns. They're gonna have issues. They're gonna have to protect themselves. They're gonna have to hire security companies. They have to go through so much. I was reading that in the New York bill recently, which I want to do a video on that. But in the New York bill that passed, where recreational is legal now, it's the cannabis law, or New York cannabis law. in order to have a permit to be an operator of some way, you have to prove that you have the land, the buildings, and security and protocols and all that stuff, which I thought was interesting. But there's a lot of aspects of the New York law that I don't like. But we'll see how they all play out. But I just descheduling it would at least get the banks involved. Would at least create this issue where interstate commerce isn't this huge crime. I think it would benefit everybody overall. I do see the problems that people are talking about, but marijuana is so accessible now. Whether you're in a bad jurisdiction and whatnot, why not take the tax money, use it for schools, use it for education, use it for these studies, and figure the problem out. But the kid is still smoking a joint or smoking a bowl while he's driving. It's happening now, even in the jurisdictions where the state and county it's illegal. So I'm not hearing a problem there, and that bothers me. And like I'm saying, lessen the demand, regulate it. Then it'll just be the people who can't get access to it, whether because they can't get the medical license or because they can't, they're not of age or whatever it is. That'll be the black market. You can focus on cracking down on them. That might happen. But there's just too many issues to think about. So I don't know. That didn't really leave me positive, even though it progressed. The Democrats have that majority there, so I don't know. Still didn't leave me positive. Like this is gonna be something that's gonna make it far. But we'll see what happens. I'm still hopeful. I still think this is the year. 2022 is the year of 420. Just do the math. Just do the math. All right, people. Have a good one.